My name is Nicole Taylor. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Bellevue, Washington. It's a peaceful city with clean streets, quiet neighborhoods, and people who smile politely but never really look you in the eye. You know the kind. From the outside, everything looks perfect. Lawns trimmed, dogs walked, Teslas in every other driveway. But what no one sees are the cracks underneath. And mine? They were hiding in plain sight, wearing matching bridesmaid dresses and fake smiles. This story isn't about just being left out of a photo. If only it were that simple. No, this is about the slow, silent kind of betrayal. The kind that's dressed up as friendship but feels more like being smothered while you're wide awake. And the day they cut me out of that group picture, that was just the moment I realized how disposable they believed I was. It all began 6 months ago, in early spring. I was sitting in my car outside of my best friend's house, Jessica, though now I wonder if that title ever truly fit. We'd been friends since sophomore year of college, glued together by late-night study sessions and mutual ex-boyfriend horror stories. Along the way, our circle grew. By the time I hit 30, I was one of 7 women in what we all called the core. Cute, right? We had a group chat, annual girls' weekends, birthdays marked on calendars, inside jokes printed on mugs. I thought I had my people. I thought I belonged. Before I go any further, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your name and where you're watching from. I want to know who's walking with me through this story. Because this one isn't light, and it definitely isn't easy, but it's real. And if you've ever felt left out, pushed aside, or erased from the picture, this might feel uncomfortably familiar. But stay with me, because how it ends might just be the hope you didn't know you needed. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss how everything turns around. But there's something about turning 30 that makes you look around and wonder if all the energy you've poured into people was ever truly returned. The rot didn't start all at once. It came in whispers, glances, missed invitations that were accidental. The first time I noticed something was off was during Sarah's engagement party. I arrived at the restaurant and saw the long table. White candles, gold name cards, glasses of rosé already half empty. And my name? Not there. They had to grab a chair from the bar, like I was some last-minute extra. "I thought you weren't coming," Sarah said with a shrug, her lips stretching into that kind of tight-lipped smile women use when they're trying not to smirk. From there, it was one thing after another. I started getting left out of smaller brunches, weekend plans. They'd post pictures, laughing over mimosas, all of them arm in arm. And I'd sit at home, phone in hand, telling myself they just forgot to include me, that I was overthinking it. But the mind doesn't lie when the heart's already cracked. Then came the wedding. Jessica's younger sister, Mallory, was getting married. And Jessica had asked all the girls to be part of the bridal party. Every single one of them, except me. I didn't want to make it awkward, she told me when I asked. After 3 glasses of wine gave me enough courage. Mallory just wanted girls she was super close with. I mean, you two never really clicked. Super close. I was the one who picked up Mallory from the airport when she moved to Seattle. I helped her find her first apartment. But suddenly, none of that counted. I told myself I'd let it go, that weddings were stressful, that friendships go through rough patches. But deep down, I knew I was being iced out. Quietly, methodically. Like I'd become the easy target for their need to bond over exclusion. Still, I showed up to the wedding, dressed nice, brought a gift, smiled through gritted teeth, and that's when it happened. They were taking the group photo right outside the venue, a beautiful glass garden tucked into the hills of Snoqualmie. The photographer lined them up, all 6 of them in their pastel gowns, Jessica at the center like she owned the sun. I stood nearby, holding my phone, waiting for the casual invite that never came. "Nicole, can you take this for us?" someone asked. I blinked. "You want me to take the picture?" Jessica turned, adjusted her earring, didn't even meet my eyes. "You're the best with angles," she said. So I took it. I framed it perfectly. I even counted down like a professional. And when I handed the phone back, I smiled. But something inside me cracked like ice under pressure. That night, I drove home in silence. Bellevue passed me by in flashes. Streetlights, traffic signals, the glow of restaurants still buzzing with life. My apartment felt colder than usual. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of my bed, shoes still on, staring at the picture they'd posted not an hour later. The core. Forever, my girls. The caption burned. The likes poured in. And there I was, completely erased, like I never existed. But here's the thing about being pushed to the side. Some people crumble. Others rebuild. I didn't text them the next day. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't beg to be included. Instead, I started looking for billboards. There's a long stretch of road just outside Jessica's neighborhood. 2-lane street, quiet, but heavily trafficked during morning commutes. I passed it every time I visited her house, which used to be often. That week, I called the company listed in faded font on the bottom corner. The price wasn't cheap, but it was doable. A month's worth of rent. Maybe 2. But revenge, done right, has a price. I spent a full week designing it. I didn't want anything cruel or vulgar. No insults. Just truth. When it went up, I waited. I didn't say a word. I let them see it on their own. Let the shock ripple through their perfect little ecosystem. And when Jessica texted me a string of panicked messages, I didn't respond. Because by then, something had shifted in me. Something irreversible. They had erased me from a photo. I had carved myself into their skyline. They tried to make me invisible. I made myself unforgettable. And this is how it all began. I didn't go back to their group chat. I muted it for a while before finally leaving. No announcement, no drama, just a quiet exit that none of them acknowledged publicly. Not even Jessica. I watched from the shadows as they continued posting brunch selfies and birthday celebrations as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. I had seen behind the curtain, and now the illusion was shattered. My billboard had done exactly what I hoped. It pierced their perfect little world. I never needed to scream or cause a scene. The truth, written 10 feet tall in bold white letters, was louder than anything I could have said in person. It read, "When they cut you out of the photo, make your own frame. Some friendships are just costumes." Signed, the one you left out. That message wasn't just for them. It was for every version of me that ever stayed quiet, that ever laughed at jokes made at her expense, that ever tried too hard to be liked. It was for the girl who handed over her camera with a smile while choking on the sting of rejection. Now, I had their attention. The silence from their side was louder than ever, and yet I knew it wasn't peace. It was tension, and they were scrambling behind their curated screens to figure out how to spin it. 2 days later, I saw the first attempt. Jessica posted a story holding a coffee cup, staring out a rain-slick window, captioned, "Some people will do anything for attention. We rise above." It didn't name me. It didn't have to. The comments filled up fast. Heart emojis, friends saying stay strong, the occasional haters gonna hate. I read every single one. My name was never typed, but I felt it in every vague phrase, every spiritual quote copied from Pinterest. Still, I said nothing. It was around then that people started messaging me privately. Some were friends of theirs. Some were strangers who'd seen the billboard on their morning drive. One message stood out. A woman named Renee who used to work with Jessica. We'd only met twice, and she never seemed to be part of their inner circle, but she sent a simple line, "Good for you. They did the same thing to me." I blinked, reading it twice. The same thing? I messaged her back, asking what she meant. What followed was a voice message, hesitant and shaky, but honest. Renee had once been close to Jessica and Sarah too, but when she went through a rough patch, laid off from her job, struggling with depression, they slowly distanced themselves. First came the missed texts, then the "we're just so busy lately." And finally, she found out through someone else that she hadn't been invited to Jessica's engagement party. "I thought it was just me," she said. "But hearing about what happened to you, it makes me feel like maybe I wasn't crazy." That message stuck with me. I'd spent so long doubting my own perspective, wondering if I was too sensitive or just imagining the coldness. But now I realized I wasn't the only one they'd iced out. I wasn't the first, and I probably wouldn't be the last. The realization didn't make it hurt less, but it gave the pain a shape, a name. I started to reflect more deeply on the kind of friendships I had been holding on to, the ones I had built my identity around. We called ourselves the core, like we were some kind of unshakable unit. But in truth, I had been orbiting them for years, never fully embraced. I had missed the signs, the half-smiles, the subtle jabs, the group plans made without me, but shared with the world. It wasn't until they stopped pretending that I saw how fake it had all been. And yet, part of me still wanted someone, anyone, to admit what they'd done, to say sorry. But apologies never came. Instead, they started rewriting the story. I heard through mutual acquaintances that I was being painted as unstable, overly dramatic, someone who couldn't handle growing apart. It was subtle enough to seem innocent, but intentional enough to sting. One night I got a call from Lauren, the one who had asked me to take the group photo. She sounded nervous, like she was trying to measure every word. "I just wanted to say, I didn't know you felt excluded," she said. My breath caught. "You didn't?" I asked, my voice colder than I meant it to be. "I mean, I thought things were just shifting naturally. You know how life gets." "Right. Life gets. And I get erased." She was quiet for a beat. "Nicole, it wasn't personal, but it always is when no one stands up for you. I didn't expect a fight. I didn't even want one. I just wanted her to sit with that truth, even for a second." She mumbled something about catching up soon, and I never heard from her again. But I wasn't done yet. The billboard was just the beginning, a statement. Now I needed something that wouldn't fade after 30 days. Something permanent. Something they couldn't just scroll past. I started a blog, anonymous at first. I called it Erased Frame. It was part memoir, part open letter to anyone who's ever been left out, iced out, or pushed out of friendships that claimed to be lifelong. I didn't name names, but I didn't need to. The emotions were universal. The betrayal, the doubt, the slow realization that you've been a prop in someone else's spotlight. It resonated. The blog exploded faster than I expected. Comments flooded in. Women and men from all over the country wrote about their own core groups, the ones who turned cold, the friendships that became toxic under the weight of social image. I was stunned by how common the story was. My experience, as isolating as it had felt, was just one version of a pattern repeating everywhere. Jessica and the others found out about it within the first week. I knew because Jessica's cousin messaged me on Instagram, furious. "How dare you air dirty laundry for likes?" she wrote. "You're bitter because you got left behind." I didn't respond, but I screenshotted it. And I wrote a post the next day titled, "When they call you bitter, it's because you finally tasted the truth." People loved it. It was raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic. And the truth was, I wasn't bitter. I was awake. For the first time in years, I was building something that was mine. Not built on pleasing others, not diluted to fit a group chat tone, not smiling through digs because I didn't want to rock the boat. This was me, unedited, and it was powerful. The more I shared, the more I healed. But also, the more I remembered. Little moments that once seemed small came back with new meaning. The time Jessica laughed when I cried at her bachelorette speech. The time they all agreed to cancel dinner because Sarah had cramps, only for me to find out they'd gone without me anyway. The way my birthday messages were always forgotten or late, even as I bought them personalized gifts. They had never seen me as an equal. They had seen me as expendable. And now, I was finally done trying to prove them wrong. I was busy building something better. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking anyone to see me. I was making myself visible, on my own terms. 2 months after the billboard came down and the blog started gaining traction, something happened that I never anticipated. A message showed up in my inbox. Short, formal, and signed with a name I hadn't read in years. Amelia Prescott. We went to college together, and she was a journalism major who had now landed a job at a regional magazine focused on women's stories of transformation. She said someone had forwarded her my blog and asked if I'd be willing to do an interview. Not anonymous, not veiled. She wanted the face behind Erased Frame. For a moment, I hesitated. The idea of putting my name and face on the very thing that had already ruffled so many feathers felt like standing in front of a firing squad. But then I remembered something my therapist once told me during a session I'd had after my breakup last year. When you tell the truth, you set yourself free. And sometimes, you set others free too. So I said yes. The interview wasn't what I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exploitative. Amelia sat across from me in a quiet cafe on Main Street and asked questions that went deeper than the incident at the wedding. She asked about the history of the friendships, about what I thought kept me trying so hard to belong, about the difference between being included and being truly seen. I found myself saying things out loud that I had never fully admitted, even to myself. I think, I said, stirring my untouched coffee, I stayed because I thought their acceptance validated my worth. If they liked me, then maybe I was doing something right. Maybe I mattered. Amelia didn't interrupt. She just nodded gently, letting the silence between us say what I couldn't. For the first time, I realized how much of my identity I had wrapped in being agreeable, easy to manage, non-threatening, the peacemaker, the helper, the one who never caused waves. And when I stopped playing that role, they had no use for me. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was titled, "The Friend They Erased: One Woman's Journey from Exclusion to Empowerment." It wasn't clickbait. It was honest. And it went viral within days. That's when everything changed. Emails poured in, dozens, then hundreds. From women who had walked away from sororities that turned toxic, from professionals who'd been excluded from office cliques, from stay-at-home moms who were ghosted by their neighborhood book clubs. One woman from Texas wrote, "I printed your blog post and handed it to my teenage daughter. I wanted her to know it's okay to walk away from people who don't clap when you win." I cried reading that one. Not just because of the message, but because someone had finally clapped for me. But not everyone was supportive. The backlash came in quiet waves. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly popped up with performative concern. "Is everything okay, Nicole? Just saw the article. Hope you're not burning bridges you'll regret." Others were more direct. Anonymous comments telling me I was playing the victim, milking a petty incident for attention, that I should move on. The core didn't stay quiet either. Jessica posted a story that same week, a photo of all of them at a rooftop bar, laughing, their glasses raised high. The caption read, "Real friends don't need to prove anything." The timing wasn't a coincidence. It never was with her. Always subtle, always calculated. But what she didn't realize was that I was no longer interested in fighting for a seat at their table. I was building my own table now, and it was growing. My blog evolved into a full platform, a digital community called The Frame. It hosted personal essays, resources on emotional boundaries, and stories from other women who had faced similar exclusions. We even started monthly Zoom circles where women from around the world could gather, share, cry, and encourage one another. That's when the message came that truly shifted everything. It was from Melissa. Melissa was Jessica's childhood best friend and had been part of the core until about 3 years ago, when she moved to Oregon and gradually fell off the radar. I remembered how, back then, they'd described her as distant and overdramatic. But now, reading her message, I saw things differently. "I read your piece," she wrote, "and I just want to say I'm sorry. I watched them do this to you, and I stayed silent because I was afraid. But they did it to me too, not as publicly, but slowly, quietly. And when I moved away, it was like I never existed." We scheduled a call that weekend. Seeing her face pop up on my laptop screen, even through pixels, felt like unearthing a part of my past I didn't know I missed. We talked for 2 hours straight. We laughed about old college parties and cried about how we both had spent years trying to be small enough to fit into a mold someone else made for us. Melissa had become a therapist. She told me that she now recognized all the signs of emotional manipulation and group gaslighting in the way the core operated. "They're a machine," she said. "And the moment you stop playing the role they assigned you, they spit you out." Her words hit deep, because I had finally stopped playing the role of the always available friend, the forever forgiving doormat. And now that I was standing tall, I was no longer compatible with their system. The next day, I sat at my desk with a blank page open, trying to figure out how to write the next chapter of this story. Not just on paper, but in my life. I thought about all the ways I had allowed myself to be muted, edited, cropped out like a face in a photo. But now I had a voice, a clear, resonant one, and I wasn't afraid to use it. That afternoon, I received a direct message that made my stomach tighten. "Jessica." It was short, just a single sentence. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. She followed up the next day. This time, longer. "I know you're hurt. And I know you probably think I don't care. But I do. I just didn't know how to handle everything. Things got out of hand. I don't want to lose more people. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for what felt like hours. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to see her, to sit face to face and finally unload years of hurt. But the wisest part of me? It just felt tired. Still, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in downtown Bellevue. She arrived first, dressed impeccably, but her face looked more strained than I'd ever seen. When I sat down, she didn't speak right away. She just looked at me like I was a stranger she used to love. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I don't even know where to start." I folded my arms. "Then start where it actually matters." She nodded slowly. "We hurt you. I hurt you. And I think maybe I was threatened by the way you started standing up for yourself. You were always so kind, so reliable. And when that changed, I didn't know how to adapt. So I shut you out." It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from her. But it still wasn't enough. "You didn't just shut me out," I replied. "You made me question my worth. You watched me fade and said nothing. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. For once, I wasn't making it easy. I wasn't smoothing the edges of her guilt. "I don't expect us to be friends again," I said, standing to leave. "But I hope you learn from this. Because the next person you erase might not stay silent." And with that, I walked out. The door didn't slam behind me. There was no dramatic music playing in the background. Just the quiet, calm certainty that I was done begging people to choose me. I had already chosen myself. And from this point forward, there was no turning back. Nicole's blog, The Frame, had become more than a personal outlet. It was a lifeline for thousands of people who had spent too long believing they were the problem. Every new post brought another wave of stories in the comments, people shedding their shame in exchange for belonging. And somewhere between all those paragraphs and late-night replies, I started to realize I was changing too. Not just healing, evolving. There was a quiet strength that began to replace the ache inside me, like scar tissue forming where the cuts used to bleed. But growth never happens in a straight line. It's a jagged, uneven process that doesn't wait for you to be ready. One afternoon, I walked past that same stretch of road near Jessica's neighborhood. The billboard had long since been taken down, replaced by an ad for a law firm. But even with a new message plastered across it, I could still see the ghost of my words in the space where they had once lived. It was a strange feeling, pride and grief knotted together. I had stood up for myself in a way I never thought I could, but I had also closed the door on something that had once felt like family. A few days later, my mom called. She had just read the article that had gone viral and hadn't said anything until then. "I'm proud of you," she said, voice soft. "But I'm also worried. It's a lot to carry." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "I know, but I needed to carry it before I could let it go." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just said, "Don't forget to breathe." That night, I started journaling again. Not for the blog, just for me. I wrote about every time I had betrayed my own boundaries to stay liked, every apology I gave for things I didn't do, every smile I forced while feeling like I was fading. And then I wrote about now, about standing up, about being seen, about speaking without shrinking. The transformation wasn't about revenge anymore. That chapter had closed the moment I walked out of the cafe and left Jessica sitting there with her perfectly rehearsed apology. Now it was about reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I signed up for a storytelling event in Seattle called Unfiltered Voices. It was an open mic for people to share moments that had shaped them. I'd never spoken in front of a crowd like that before, but something told me I needed to do it. Not for the applause, not for validation, but to hear my own story in my own voice. When the night came, my hands trembled as I walked to the microphone. The room was dim, intimate, maybe 50 people. I cleared my throat, looked around, and said, "My name is Nicole, and I used to believe that being left out meant I wasn't enough. But sometimes, being left out is just the first step to walking your own path." I told them everything, not just the photo, not just the billboard. I told them about the slow erasure, the hollow birthdays, the way women smile while twisting knives. I spoke of the moment I stopped trying to be palatable and started being real. When I stepped down, the applause was soft at first. Then it grew. Not because the story was dramatic, but because it was true. After the event, a woman named Callie approached me. She looked about my age, with tired eyes and kind hands. "I just left a 10-year friendship," she said. "Your story felt like mine. Thank you." Moments like that became more frequent. People started recognizing me, not as the woman from the Billboard scandal, but as someone who had survived being invisible and dared to shine anyway. I was invited to speak at workshops, contribute essays to online publications, even participate in a panel about female social dynamics. Each step scared me, and each one made me braver, but not everything was easy. Growth rarely is. There were nights when loneliness crept back in, when I missed the ease of old routines, the group chats, the spontaneous dinners, the shared memories that now felt tainted. Healing doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to carry it differently. I learned how to hold space for the girl I was without letting her make my decisions. One evening, I got a text from Sarah. It had been almost 8 months since the wedding. Her message was simple. "I owe you an apology. I see now what we did. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. It didn't make me angry. It didn't make me relieved either. It just made me think. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it for days, and when I finally did reply, I wrote, "Thank you. I accept your apology. I hope you grow from this the way I had to. No bitterness, no venom, just truth." By then, I had started teaching writing workshops called Unwritten Rules, spaces for women to explore their own silenced stories. We wrote about friendships, breakups, betrayals, family wounds. We cried. We laughed. We held space for each other in a way that was real, raw, and healing. One of the women, a nurse named Eliza, said something that stuck with me. I kept shrinking because I thought it made me easier to love, but all it did was make me disappear. I saw myself in her words, and I knew then that my pain had become a mirror where others could find themselves. That mattered more than any apology Jessica could have given. My relationships changed too. I started nurturing friendships that felt mutual, that didn't require performance. I spent more time with Melissa, who had become one of the most grounding people in my life. We joked that we were like the outcasts of the outcasts, but it was the healthiest friendship I'd ever known. Sometimes we'd go for walks around Lake Sammamish, talking about everything from childhood trauma to favorite ice cream flavors. It was simple, it was honest, and it reminded me that friendship wasn't supposed to feel like an audition. I no longer felt the need to monitor my tone, to over-explain my feelings, or to apologize for taking up space. And that, in itself, was freedom. The transformation showed up in little things. I started dressing for myself, not for approval. I wore bold lipstick and no makeup at all on other days, just because I wanted to. I redecorated my apartment, finally letting go of furniture that felt like it belonged to someone else's taste. I threw a birthday party and only invited people who made me feel seen. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was enough, more than enough. On my 32nd birthday, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by real friends, real laughter, and a real sense of peace. Someone raised a glass and said, "To Nicole, who taught us that the ones who walk away might just be walking home to themselves." Everyone clinked glasses, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally whole. And even though the scars of exclusion remained, they no longer defined me. I was no longer the girl they cropped out of the photo. I was the woman who built the frame. And this was only the beginning. The first time I saw Jessica again in public after everything, it wasn't planned. It was a Tuesday afternoon at a local bookstore in downtown Bellevue. I was there hosting a small event for the frame, discussing the theme of emotional boundaries in adult friendships. I had just finished speaking when I saw her walk in, holding a cup of coffee, hair pulled back into that same effortless bun I remembered so well. For a split second, my breath caught. Not from fear, from memory. The kind that hits you in the chest when a ghost you've made peace with suddenly walks back into the room. She wasn't alone. A woman stood beside her, someone I didn't recognize. They browsed through books as if they were just there by coincidence, but Jessica kept glancing toward the corner where I stood. Our eyes met once, then again, and finally, she made her way over. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said, almost casually. I didn't smile. I didn't offer the usual small talk. "It's a public bookstore." She gave a short nod. "I read the last post you wrote, about speaking your truth even if your voice shakes." I waited. "I just wanted to say," she started, then faltered, her gaze flickering away. "You've become someone really strong." I watched her for a moment, unsure what she wanted from me. Redemption? Closure? Forgiveness that I wasn't sure I owed her? I finally replied, "I always was. You just never wanted to see it." She didn't argue. She just stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. And then, as if sensing she wasn't welcome in the chapter I was writing now, she turned and left. No dramatics. No final words. Just silence. The encounter lingered with me long after I got home, not because I was shaken, but because I realized something powerful. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel the burning injustice that used to keep me awake. I felt calm, detached, free. But freedom doesn't mean forgetting. A week later, I received an email from a local news outlet asking if I'd consider doing a video interview for their online series Bellevue Voices. They were highlighting women who had turned personal adversity into something meaningful for the community. At first, I hesitated. Sharing my story once was hard enough. Sharing it again on camera? That was another level of vulnerability. But then I thought of all the people who'd messaged me, the lives touched by something as simple as telling the truth out loud. I couldn't shrink now. The interview was scheduled for a Saturday morning at a studio in Seattle. I arrived early, notes in hand, though I didn't plan to use them. As the cameras rolled, the host asked, "What was the moment you knew you'd never go back to who you used to be?" I didn't need to think. The moment I realized I didn't have to fight to be loved. The words left my mouth with surprising ease. That was the truth I had waited years to say. I used to twist myself into whatever shape people needed, thinking their acceptance would fill the spaces where I doubted myself. But real connection doesn't require self-erasure, and real friends don't make you question your worth. When the interview aired, it reached more people than I ever imagined. My inbox overflowed. The frames following doubled. Invitations came from other cities to speak, to teach, to tell my story to rooms full of strangers looking for their own way out of silence. It was everything I thought I wanted, and yet, part of me felt restless. Something was missing. One night, lying in bed, I realized what it was. I had found peace. I had built a platform, but I had never given myself permission to be angry. Not really. I had intellectualized it, written about it, spoken around it, but I had never felt it fully. I had tried to take the high road so many times that I forgot the importance of walking through the fire instead of tiptoeing around the edges. So I gave myself that space. I sat down and wrote a letter, not for anyone else, not for the blog, just for me. I addressed it to the core, every name, every memory, every betrayal. I wrote until my fingers ached. I wrote until the shame melted into clarity. I didn't hold back. I didn't rationalize their behavior or soften my wounds. I let myself bleed onto the page. And then I folded the letter, walked outside, and burned it in a small metal bin on my balcony. The flames flickered high, then settled. It wasn't symbolic. It was release. That act shifted something inside me. I started writing a book. Not just a collection of blog posts or reflections. A full memoir. The story of erasure, reclamation, and everything in between. I wanted to give a voice to every woman who had ever been edited out of someone else's narrative. The process was brutal. There were nights I couldn't sleep, memories surfacing like old bruises I thought had faded. But there was also beauty in the honesty, in the ownership. The book became my obsession for months. I wrote in the early mornings, during lunch breaks, late into the night. I poured myself into it, not for revenge, not even for validation, but for truth. Because if I had learned anything, it was that our stories, our full, unpolished stories, have the power to set us free. When I finished the final chapter, I cried. Not because it was sad, but because it was mine. The manuscript was accepted by a small, independent publisher, known for amplifying underrepresented voices. The editor called me personally and said, "We think this is going to resonate deeply, not just with women, with anyone who's ever felt invisible." The book was titled The Frame I Built. Its cover was simple: a broken picture frame mended with gold, inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold to highlight the cracks rather than hide them. That was me. Not flawless, not untouched, but whole, precisely because of what had been broken. The release date was set for the following spring, and when it came, everything changed again. There were book signings, panels, podcasts, but what meant the most were the letters. Handwritten, emailed, DMs, stories of pain, healing, loss, and liberation. People told me about the moment they saw themselves in my pages and decided to walk away from toxic friendships, to say no, to speak up. One message stood out more than the others. It was from Mallory, Jessica's sister. She wrote, "I saw the billboard. I heard the whispers, and I believed them, but then I read your book, and I cried, because now I see what I never saw then. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for standing there while they pushed you out." That message didn't undo the past, but it was a reminder that people can grow, that some truths take time to reach the surface. By the end of the year, the Frame had become a nonprofit dedicated to helping women rebuild after emotional trauma. We hosted retreats, writing workshops, therapy scholarships, and every single piece of it was rooted in one simple truth. Being left out doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you were never meant to stay small enough to fit into their frame. At one of our events, I stood before a room filled with women from all over the country, each carrying her own story. I looked out at them and said, "You don't have to be invited to take up space. You're allowed to exist, loudly, boldly, and without permission." The applause was thunderous, but the moment that stayed with me most came later, when a young woman approached me in tears. "I was going to apologize to someone I cut out of my life years ago," she said. "But after hearing you speak, I realized I need to apologize to myself first, for letting it happen, for thinking I deserved it." She hugged me tight, and I whispered back, "That's where healing begins. Not in their approval, in our own forgiveness." And in that moment, I knew I had arrived at the edge of something greater, not just revenge, not just healing, but true power. The kind that doesn't need to scream to be heard. Because now, I wasn't writing to be seen. I was writing so no one else had to feel invisible again. Spring came again to Bellevue, but this time, it felt different. The air was crisp, the skies a pale silver blue, and every cherry blossom that lined the streets seemed to mark a quiet kind of rebirth. My days no longer revolved around checking who posted what, or over-analyzing messages that never came. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head anymore. I didn't shrink when walking into places I used to avoid. The weight I once carried like a second skin had started to lift, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had grown strong enough to hold it without breaking. The book was in its second print. The Frame had expanded beyond anything I ever imagined. We now had a team of 5 women, each one with her own story of exclusion and resilience, running the nonprofit side of the organization. We were hosting support groups not just in Washington but in other states too, and people began reaching out from overseas. Our message was clear, and it was spreading fast. You are not invisible. You are not too much. You are not alone. I'd walk into coffee shops or bookstores and sometimes catch a glimpse of someone reading my book, and it still took me a moment to process that this story, my story, had become something people carried with them. It wasn't just mine anymore. It had become part of something collective, something shared. That was the most humbling part. I didn't just survive what they did to me. I transformed it into something that could hold others when they needed it most. But the past has a strange way of returning, even when you've long stopped waiting for it. One afternoon, I was sorting through packages in the small office space we'd rented downtown when I saw a familiar handwriting on a manila envelope. There was no return address, but I knew immediately who it was from. Jessica's handwriting hadn't changed since college. Neat, almost overly so, like she always had something to prove. I stood there for a long time before opening it, debating whether I even needed to. But curiosity is a force stronger than pride. and part of me still wanted to know what else could be said after all that had already happened. Inside was a letter and a framed photograph. The letter was long, pages filled with looping ink and what read more like a journal entry than a letter meant to be read. She spoke about regret, about fear, about the way we're sometimes so desperate to keep our place in a group that we betray the ones we love most. She admitted she had felt threatened by the strength she saw in me, and had allowed that fear to twist into cruelty. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't beg for reconciliation. She just told the truth, finally, without manipulation, without spin. And somehow, that made it feel more real than any apology could. The photo was from years ago, one of the only pictures we'd ever taken as just the two of us. It was from our senior year in college, sitting on the hood of my old Civic, arms slung over each other's shoulders, sunburnt and smiling like the world was still soft and unbroken. On the back of the frame, she had written, "For the days before we lost ourselves." I didn't cry. Not because it didn't touch me, but because I'd already mourned that version of us long ago. Still, I placed the photo in the bottom drawer of my desk, not as a keepsake, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of where I'd come from. A reminder that even beautiful beginnings don't always lead to happy endings. And that's okay. That night, I sat down with Melissa and shared the letter. She read it carefully, then looked at me with a question in her eyes. "What are you going to do with it?" I shrugged. "Nothing. I think it was meant to be written more than it was meant to be answered." And that was the truth. Not every story needs a sequel. Some just need to be acknowledged, closed, and shelved so we can move on to the next chapter with our hands free. The next few months moved quickly. Our nonprofit was selected for a national spotlight campaign highlighting grassroots organizations led by women. I traveled more than I ever had before. New York, Chicago, Atlanta, sharing stages with people I used to admire from a distance, now realizing I belonged there just as much. Each speech, each panel, each conversation felt like another stitch in the quilt of my healing. But the biggest moment came quietly, without fanfare, in a middle school gymnasium just outside Spokane. We had started a youth outreach program through The Frame, working with teenage girls navigating friendship trauma and identity struggles. That day, we held our first in-person summit. I was scheduled to speak last, following hours of group sessions, journaling activities, and open discussions. When I walked onto the stage, I looked out at rows of girls, some barely teenagers, others already carrying the weight of the world in their posture, and I remembered myself at that age, hungry to belong, afraid to stand alone. I told them my story, but not the polished version. I spoke about the loneliness, the self-doubt, the quiet violence of being ignored by people who once called you family. I told them about the billboard, the blog, the silence that followed. I told them about finding strength in the parts of yourself others taught you to hide. And at the end, I said, "You don't have to wait until you're 31 to choose yourself. You can start now." They stood and clapped. Not because I was perfect, not because I had all the answers, but because they saw someone who had walked through fire and came out not burned, but branded with clarity. One of the girls, maybe 12 years old, came up after the session with tears in her eyes. She hugged me and whispered, "I thought there was something wrong with me because my friends left. But now, I think maybe there's something right with me that they couldn't handle." I held her for a moment longer than I needed to and whispered back, "Never change yourself just to make someone else comfortable." I returned home that weekend exhausted and whole. The kind of whole that doesn't need closure, because it knows the story was never about them. It was always about me, my becoming, my freedom. Life settled into a new kind of rhythm, one with purpose, peace, and presence. I planted herbs on my windowsill. I took weekends off. I spent quiet mornings journaling and loud nights dancing in my living room with women who saw me fully and loved me fiercely. My world was smaller than it used to be, but it was real, and it was mine. Every so often, I'd still pass the neighborhood where Jessica lived. I didn't detour anymore. I didn't speed up. I didn't look away. I drove by like it was any other street, because that's what it had become, a place I had once been, not where I lived. One evening, I pulled up next to the stoplight across from where my billboard had once stood. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting a soft orange hue over everything. I looked at the empty frame of the current ad, soon to be replaced by something new, and I smiled, because I no longer needed a billboard to be seen. I had built a life that spoke for itself, and now, when I look at pictures, I no longer wonder if I'll be in them. I know that I will be, because I'm the one holding the camera, and I decide who gets framed. A year passed, 12 full months since I stood in that bookstore, watching Jessica pretend to browse while stealing glances in my direction. 12 months since the book came out, since the letters started arriving, since I finally stopped waiting for apologies that would never fix what had been broken. Life didn't transform overnight, but it grew, slowly and intentionally, like a garden that had once been neglected now beginning to bloom. I had moved out of my small apartment and into a modest house on the outskirts of Bellevue, a quiet neighborhood nestled between pine trees and winding roads. It wasn't flashy, but it felt like peace. I filled it with plants, natural light, and bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. The kind of place that felt lived in, not curated. The kind of place where laughter echoed off the walls, and silence felt like comfort, not loneliness. I had also adopted a dog, a rescue named Olive with mismatched eyes and a nervous tail that wagged more each week. She followed me everywhere, curling up on the rug while I wrote or pressing her nose into my palm when she sensed something heavy in me trying to rise. She became my shadow, my anchor, my soft landing on hard days. Work at the Frame had expanded far beyond what I imagined. We'd hired more staff, received grant funding, and created a podcast called Out of the Frame, where women told their own stories of friendship trauma, identity, and healing. Each episode was raw, unfiltered, and real. It reached people in small towns, big cities, different countries. There was something universal about the pain of being cast aside, and something revolutionary about choosing to rebuild anyway. One of the biggest surprises came when a local university invited me to teach a short course on narrative healing, using personal storytelling as a tool for self-awareness and transformation. Standing in front of that first classroom of students, I realized something profound. I wasn't just helping others heal. I was still healing too, and maybe I always would be. But healing doesn't mean being untouched. It means learning to live fully, even with the scars. At the end of the course, a student named Renee, shy, observant, always in the back row, came up to me with trembling hands. "I almost dropped out," she said quietly. "I've been through some awful things I never told anyone, but your story, it made me stay. Not just in school, in the world." I hugged her tightly. Then it was worth every word. Moments like that became my markers of progress. Not awards, not social media numbers, but people who had once felt invisible finally finding the courage to be seen. Melissa and I remained close. Our friendship deepened over shared projects, late-night phone calls, and the kind of loyalty forged in fire. She eventually moved back to Washington, taking a counseling position with the Frame. We often joked that we'd been each other's accidental soulmates. Not in the romantic sense, but in the sense of finding the one person who sees you when you're too broken to recognize yourself. One rainy evening, we sat on my couch drinking tea, Olive curled between us, as thunder rumbled in the distance. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked suddenly. "The core." She nodded. "Not often," I said truthfully. "Not with anger anyway. Just with distance. Like remembering a house I used to live in that no longer fits." She sipped her tea, thoughtful. "I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I think it just means remembering without pain." I looked at her, grateful. Exactly. Eventually, time did what it always does. It softened the edges. The sting of being left out of that photo, the weight of that billboard, the hollow silence that followed. It all faded into the background of a much bigger, fuller life. But I never let myself forget the lessons. I carried them, like polished stones in my pocket, smooth from all the turning. The book was translated into 5 languages. A second one was already in the works. A collection of stories from other women who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. I wasn't the only voice anymore. That was the point. The movement had outgrown me. It was now a chorus, not a solo. One afternoon, as I sat editing chapters for the new book, An email notification popped up. Subject line, bridal shower photo, full circle. It was from Sarah. I blinked, unsure if I should open it, but I did. Inside was a single image, a group of women, laughing, colorful dresses, sunlit smiles. But this time, the woman taking the photo was also in the frame. A tripod had captured everyone. No one was missing. No one was cut out. Underneath, she had written, "You were right. Photos should never erase anyone. Thank you for showing me that." I sat there for a long moment, not crying, not angry, just reflective. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because the woman I had become didn't seek closure from the people who once made her feel small. She created her own closure, her own beginning, her own frame. Later that week, I was invited to a panel in New York on women in media. As I stood backstage, looking out at the crowd of people who had gathered to hear me speak, I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not nerves, not fear, pride. Pure, unapologetic pride. I walked onto the stage, the lights warm against my skin, and I told my story one more time. But this time, it wasn't about pain. It was about transformation. I used to believe that being left out meant I wasn't enough, I told them. Now I know it meant I was growing beyond the frame others built for me. And the moment I realized that, everything changed. The applause was steady, but I didn't need it, because I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I had already found it, in the quiet mornings, the loyal friendships, the laughter that no longer felt forced, in the way Olive leaned against me while I read on the porch, in the way I slept without replaying conversations in my head, in the way I spoke, clearly and fully, without apology. Years ago, I was cut out of a photo. Now, I owned the camera, and I had learned how to focus it on what truly mattered, not the approval of others, but the truth of who I was and who I had become. Nicole Taylor, 33 years old, storyteller, builder, survivor, no longer waiting to be included, because I had created a life where I belonged, every single day. And that, more than any billboard, any book, or any apology, was the greatest frame I had ever built. Have you ever felt like you were erased from a story you helped build? Share your experiences in the comments. If Nicole's journey touched you, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories of self-worth and emotional transformation. Send this to someone who's been left out, overlooked, or underestimated. They may need to hear that they're not alone. Remember, being excluded doesn't mean you're not enough. Sometimes it means you're growing beyond the space that could no longer contain you. Thank you for watching. And never forget, you deserve to be in the frame.